The struggle between the United States, Israel, and Iran is not a simple military confrontation, but a complex geopolitical clash rooted in decades of historical tensions, conflicting interests, and regional power dynamics. At its core, this confrontation reflects the limitations of conventional military power, the unpredictability of asymmetric warfare, and the resilience of national identity and ideology. In recent months and years, as tensions have escalated into open conflict and strategic operations, analysts and observers have pointed to several core reasons why the United States and Israel are perceived as not achieving decisive victory against Iran and, in some narratives, as being unable to contain or defeat Tehran's influence. First, one of the main reasons often highlighted is Iran's strategic depth and resilience. Tehran has built a multi-layered defense and influence network that extends far beyond its borders, including relationships with militias, proxy groups, and regional partners. Across the Middle East, this network has enabled Iran to absorb blows and retaliate through indirect channels, complicating efforts by the US and Israel to apply straightforward military pressure. These capabilities mean that Iran can strike at multiple targets and leverage regional actors to keep adversaries off balance. The effectiveness of such asymmetrical tactics undermines the traditional military superiority of the United States and Israel, forcing them into a prolonged and dispersed conflict rather than a quick, clear victory. Foreign policy. Another key factor is the economic and political cost of extended confrontation. For the United States, involvement in another major Middle Eastern war carries enormous economic burden and domestic political risk. The U.S. economy, already carrying high levels of national debt and ongoing fiscal stress, struggles to justify another costly conflict abroad, especially one that disrupts global energy markets, drives fuel prices higher, and creates uncertainty for international trade. Such economic headwinds limit Washington's appetite for sustained operations, reducing its leverage against Tehran over time. Middle East Monitor. Additionally, Israel's strategic choices have been constrained by both domestic pressures and regional diplomatic realities. When Israel and the United States engaged in military operations targeting Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure, the costs in terms of civilian casualties, disrupted trade routes, and regional backlash spiked rapidly. These consequences intensified political resistance inside Israel and abroad, eroding support for continued escalation. The economic toll and political fragmentation generated by this conflict has made it harder for Israel to claim a decisive strategic victory. Even when tactical successes have occurred, one cannot ignore the role of international opinion and diplomatic isolation. While the United States and Israel are major global powers, their actions have sometimes faced sharp criticism from other countries, international organizations, and civil society. Tehran, by contrast, uses rhetoric of defiance and resistance to project an image of sovereignty and self-determination, resonating with certain audiences in the region. Even when Tehran faces pressure, the narrative of resisting powerful adversaries enhances its political position domestically and among some regional actors. Tasnim News. A further dimension is the limitations of military technology and defense systems on both sides. Modern warfare is increasingly shaped by missile and drone capabilities, areas where Iran has invested heavily. Hypersonic missiles, long-range strike systems, and drone swarms present a challenge to traditional air defense networks, making it difficult for US and Israeli forces to establish uncontested dominance in the skies. The difficulty of intercepting advanced missiles and the limited number of interceptors available in war zones can mean that missile barrages create disproportionate strategic impact. TASS. Beyond hardware, there is an ideological and psychological dimension to this conflict. While military engagements can degrade certain capabilities, they cannot quickly dismantle deeply rooted political and cultural resistance. Iran's leaders emphasize national sovereignty and religious identity, framing resistance against foreign intervention as a moral imperative. This messaging can mobilize public support and sustain morale, even amid economic sanctions or military pressure. Such ideological resilience is difficult for external powers to counter through force alone. Tasnim News. The United States and Israel have also struggled with coherence of strategic vision and policy implementation. Multiple analyses suggest that coordinated plans, the so-called four-stage strategies or phased approaches, have stumbled before reaching decisive objectives. Competing domestic priorities in Washington and Jerusalem, along with changing regional alliances and shifting threat perceptions, have diluted the effectiveness of strategic planning. Without unified long-term strategies, military campaigns risk becoming reactive, losing momentum and direction. Tasnim News. Finally, one must consider the broader regional ripple effects. Iran's actions have often triggered reactions not just from Israel and the United States, but from other states in the Middle East. This interconnected theater where alliances shift and interests diverge means that no actor can operate in isolation. The longer the conflict continues, the more it draws in external powers, escalates economic disruptions, and fosters cycles of retaliation. In such an environment, achieving a decisive victory is not simply a matter of superior firepower, but of managing complex diplomatic, economic, and social relationships across a volatile region. Foreign policy. In summary, the idea that the United States